Wonderful. So welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Uyeda. I'm the collections manager here at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, and I'm co-chair of the Digital Archives Cluster along with Stuart Arneal from the University of Victoria. So I'd like to welcome you today. Here I am moderating today's session within this next hour, and we will hear from Jordan Stanger-Ross, Joey Takeda, Sherri Kajiwara, Kelly Fleck, and Stephanie Kawamoto. On Sunday, March 28th, we hosted our first database launch with guest speakers Joey, Eiko Ebi, Sally Ito, and Mary Kitagawa. The recording for that event is available to watch on the Landscapes of Injustice website. As an uninvited guest on these lands, I would like to acknowledge and thank the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam First peoples on whose unceded territories I have the privilege to live, work, and play. Please take a moment to acknowledge the lands where you are and share them with us in the chat. Wonderful. Our first speaker up is Jordan Stanger-Ross. He's the Associate Professor of History at the University of Victoria and Project Director for the Landscapes of Injustice Project. Please join me in welcoming Jordan.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. I think we're nearly at the same level that we had last time. We've had these huge events for these launches. It's so wonderful to see so many folks out to hear about the archives and hopefully to explore them as well. There are some folks here for a second time, I think, who were here over the weekend, so they'll have to forgive a very unsophisticated introduction that I'm giving for a second time, which is really just a thanks. I have to be really especially thankful for this opportunity to join in and introduce this launch, because I had so little to do with bringing it to fruition. We didn't realize when we started the project the wealth that existed in the case files in Library and Archives Canada, which are really the core of what we're going to be launching today. And so we went from a beginning of a project where we really didn't conceive of this to this being this major output that we're so pleased to launch, with now almost 300 people coming to these events, or 300 computers, maybe more than maybe more indeed people. And so partly, you know, so how do you get to, from not anticipating something to that point? It was partly members of the larger research community who wanted to see other areas represented, other families represented than in our original proposals. And here in Victoria, two local historians of Victoria, Anne Lee and Gordon Switzer, really pressed this issue, hoping to see case files for Japanese Canadians from who now live in Victoria and who were in Victoria in the 1940s represented in our work. And so we had this impetus from a community of researchers, and then folks working on the project, and particularly research assistants. And some of them are here today, and I may be missing some. But Caitlin Finley, who's here today, and Camille Hazel, who's here, and others worked in the archives and recognized the tremendously rich and valuable records that existed there, and identified those that should be shared and those that perhaps we should not share online. And both of those two researchers who are here today, and many other student researchers, did a lot of really careful, sensitive work in that respect. And then once we had identified the records, a large number of research assistants had to take on this work that we hadn't anticipated at the start, of dividing the records up and making them searchable and creating something I had never said when I started the project, metadata, to describe each of these documents. And so Gord Lyle, Lindsay Jacobson I saw here, Natsuki Abe, and Nathaniel Hayes all contributed to that process, along with many other research assistants. And under the direction of Stuart Arneal and Lisa Uyeda at the Nikkei National Museum, the cluster operated, Lisa, who's of course our host, and Joey Takeda, who's going to introduce the archive today, designed it as a piece of software that we can interact with now. And so I'm just really thankful to all of these people for all the work that that they did. But I want to single out, and he hides himself in video, but Mike, will you at least make your sound available? So you have to make some noise, I guess. Oh, there you are, and he's making his video available too. Thanks, Mike. So hopefully you can see Mike. He sometimes is in the background of these events, but really this is Mike's vision. Mike identified from an early, from just as soon as we started encountering these materials, he recognized how valuable they could be to the community. And he started to share them as best he could, even when we only had a few of them processed, and even when he had to go through huge, long reams of microfilm to find the files for a particular family. He did that and trained other people to do that, and really impressed upon us throughout the process how important these resources would be, and wanted to hold events like these ones, and started to do so months ago, where people share this excitement and opportunity, and also the difficulty of the files with one another. So Mike, I hope you're happy both on Sunday and today to see the reception that we're getting, and I hope you continue to be happy with our rollout. This is really inspired by you, and I'm tremendously thankful for your work in this respect and in every respect on the project.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the people who have attended. So hopefully this digital archive will be of great benefit.
Thank you, Jordan. And of course, we echo your kind words to Mike and the whole research team that really helped make this happen. So today we celebrate the culmination of years of research and analysis and thousands of hours contributed by LOI's partner institutions, colleagues, research assistants, volunteers, and staff at the University of Victoria. And on Sunday, we launched the database by cutting a ribbon. And today we have a Shinto lucky charm to give thanks to everyone for all their hard work. And we acknowledge the thousands of Japanese Canadians who experienced the unjust forced removal and dispossession, and those who continue to live with the effects of it today. So I'll hang this up here. There's 7 folds to represent 7 years of the research project. And thank you, Mike, for the great idea for launching today's session. So without further ado, I'll, Mike, I see myself on the screen again. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'll introduce Joey. So he's here to give us a walkthrough of this database, Landscapes of Injustice, Digital Archives database. Joey is a 4th generation Yonsei, Japanese Canadian, who has worked with the Digital Archives Cluster since 2018 to create the infrastructure and processing for the archival website. He received his honors Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and Gender Studies from the University of Victoria, and is in the final stage of his Master's of Arts degree in English Literature and Language from the University of British Columbia, and focusing on modern and contemporary Asian Canadian literature and the digital humanities. He is also the user interface developer for the Digital Humanities Innovation Lab at Simon Fraser University, and in collaboration with the Endings Project at the University of Victoria, has worked with Martin Holmes from HCMC on developing Static Search, the serverless and archivable search engine that powers the search and advanced search functionality in the Landscapes of Injustice digital archive website. Thank you very much, Joey, and take it away.
Thanks, Lisa. Everybody can see my screen okay? Great. As Jordan and Lisa and Mike have said, this archive is a culmination of a lot of research and labor, and it contains nearly 100,000 documents. And it's completely archivable, meaning that it's completely static and sustainably built, so that all of these records, even though they're online and there's always fears of things online going away, this has been built really with sustainability and archivability in mind. It's also completely open, so no password is necessary, and contains thousands of downloadable documents and records. And the URL is loi.uvic.ca/archive. The easiest way to use the database is to use the search functions. I'm going to move that. The easiest way is to use the search functions, which can be accessed right from the homepage. This allows you to type in something like your family's surname and see all the results that may be across the entire collection. So for instance, Lisa's ancestors used the name Okashimo, which you could type in right in the front and get back a list of documents across the entire collection, as I said. So clicking on the custodian case file, we see this is the second hit here. It brings up information, the information on the custodian case file for that person, which has been collected by the team of research assistants and volunteers. This page contains a brief abstract of information that's been derived from the custodian case file. And while there were lots of work done on these, and we did a lot of error checking and proofing, there may still be some typos, etc. But there are nearly 15,000 of these case files in the collection. So on this page here, you can download, clicking on the image will download it. There is an indicator of how large the file is, because some of the custodian case files are quite large and will require some space in your computer. And going back to the results here, one thing you might notice is that we have a collection for names and we have a collection for custodian case files. The project was very careful in ensuring that we had separate entries for each name and each case file so that we weren't inadvertently associating a case file or other document with the wrong person. So in many cases, you'll find the same name or what seems like duplicates in the database. And that's because we didn't want to say that two people were the same person without being absolutely certain. And you can do more complicated searches as well. The instructions for those searches are on the how to search page, which can be found right above the search bar here. One thing you can do, for instance, is if you know that there are variant spellings of a name, you can search for those at the same time by putting all the variants in square brackets. So for instance, if we do a search for Okashimo or Okashima, we can do that with putting O and A in square brackets. Doing a search for that returns 8 documents. And what we can see if we go down is we see another name file for an H. Okashima. Clicking that name tells us that they were in the Stanley Room, 629 Main Street. And as the custodian case file said earlier, we can see that she was a rooming housekeeper at the Stanley Room, 629.5 Main Street. So here we can start to collect and find more information than what was just in the custodian case file. Clicking that name allows us then to find where in the collection this person is mentioned. And this person is mentioned in a list of trade licenses to Japanese in certain British Columbia cities from the BC archives. And so we can explore using the side here, all the different things that are in the provincial archives. And this can also be accessed through the collections. And so LOI has also collected a number of things in special collections. So another way to browse the site would be to browse each of these collections rather than search. Of particular interest are the oral histories collected by the Oral History Cluster, which many of which contain full transcriptions, audio, and supplementary materials. For instance, if we look at many of these, they will have the full recording at the top, an abstract, and the full transcription. So we encourage you to search, browse, and explore these collections. And if you have any questions or if you like to get in touch with the project, you can either go through the About page and look at through the contact page, or as Lisa will be talking about later, there will be opportunities to discuss findings and any other problems or any problems or anything else you find in the archive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joey. It's great to see my family name being used as the example on Sunday session. Joey shared his family documents when he was navigating the search function on the database. So check that out by watching the recording from Sunday. So myself, Sherri, Kelly, and Stephanie had a chance to access our family case files a little early, ahead of everyone else. And today we're going to share what that experience was like, getting our family case files and learning more about the information that was captured in them and what we were able to learn. So I'll start off with my presentation here, if Mike can pull up the slides. And thank you, Jason, for sharing the link to the database in the chat function there. It's loi.uvic.ca/archive. And Mike, whenever you're ready to share your screen. It's great to see so many people on this session here, joining us from all across Canada. See lots of familiar names and faces. Great, and we'll just get the slideshow started. Great, that's me, Digital Archives Cluster Co-Chair, along with Stuart Arneal from the University of Victoria and Collections Manager here at the Nikkei National Museum, where I've been working here for the past 6 years now. So next slide, please. So this is a wonderful photograph. These are my great-grandparents, Kamezo and Hisayo Okashimo, on my grandmother's side of the family, my bachin. And they were married in the 1920s and lived in the Powell Street neighborhood. Hisayo was born in Hawaii and moved with her parents to Hiroshima, Japan in her teenage years. The story I know is that she spent a couple of years there before deciding Japan was not her home, and decided then to move to Canada all on her own to help her cousins, the Fukuis, run a rooming house on Alexander Street. She married Kamezo here in Vancouver when she was only 19 years old. Next slide, please. So here's a great photo from before the war. They had 5 children. My bachin is Kyoko there with the star. And these are the ages that I found listed in the custodian case file. So these are the ages when 1942 took place. They're forcibly removed from their homes and shortly after dispossessed. And Kyoko, my grandmother, bachin, is the sort of grumpy looking one on the right-hand side there. And I think I looked a lot like her when I was younger. Next slide, please. So this is what I found in my great-grandmother, great bachin's case file. So on the left-hand side, there is a standard government form listing her name, address, registration card, or registration number, pardon me, her children and occupation, which also lists her as a rooming housekeeper for the Stanley Rooms on Main Street. On the right-hand side, we can see a list of her property that was listed behind, so often referred to as chattels within the case files. And the Japanese Canadians were requested to submit a list so that they could be recorded within the case files. And so here's her page, and the original file here was transferred to microfilm or microfiche many years ago. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon to come across errors in the copying process like this one. So you might see this in your family case files. There's not much we can do. We can try to enhance it, but unfortunately, the blurred text there would be lost. But fortunately, in this case, we can still make out some of the words that are written there. So next slide, please. I was surprised. So I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights. There were large case files, not overly large, but one was about 20 pages, the other was about 40 pages. On my Uyeda side of the family, it was mostly only two or 6 pages. So it can really vary in length, depending on how much correspondence there was with the government, with the custodian, how much property there was, if there are any issues. So it will vary from family to family. So within the Okashimo case files, I was actually really surprised to discover that the family-run business was listed under Hisayo's name and not under Kamezo's name, so my great Jijin's name. I also didn't know that they sold the business just before being forced out for only $295. And that included the, I guess, the name for Stanley Rooms. It also included some of the basic furniture, and they were leasing the property where they're running their business. So it was sold September 10th, 1942. At this point in time, Kamezo was incarcerated in the prisoner of war camp in Angler, Ontario, for protesting the separation from his family and the forced labor on the road camps. My Bachin recalls not knowing where her father was for several months and how upset the family was that he was suddenly gone. Next slide, please. So also within my great Bachin's case file, it shows that Hisayo was sent and her 5 children were sent to the Slocan extension. And from family stories, I know that that was the Lemon Creek internment camp. She did not have access to her own finances and everything went through the custodian. So here is a letter to the custodian requesting $11 be paid to from her account to the Department of Education in Victoria, so her eldest daughter could enroll in level 2 English course while in Lemon Creek. Next slide, please. Kamezo also had to request access to his funds while incarcerated in Angler, and their funds were not released until after May 23rd, 1947, as indicated by this letter that I found within their case file. So that's quite a substantial amount of time after the end of the Second World War. And of course, as we've been learning, there have been restrictions in place up until 1949 on Japanese Canadians. So it's a surprise, but not a surprise for me at the same time. Next slide. So in Kamezo's file, I discovered the date that he was released, which was July of 1946. And it was almost a full year after the war had ended. He was sent to, quote unquote, a hostel on the Royal Canadian Air Force Base in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And the hostel wasn't quite an incarceration site or internment camp, but it wasn't exactly freedom either. So it was kind of this in between, and they're referred to in the government records as hostels. For more information on Moose Jaw, there's a great article by Cam Teo, a researcher, which was published in the museum's Nikkei Images publication in 2019, and it's volume 24, issue number 1, and that can be found as a free downloadable PDF on our Nikkei National Museum's website under the research tab. And I don't have a lot of family stories about Moose Jaw in my family, so Cam's research really helped to broaden that contextual history for me and sort of piece together some of the stories that I know. Next slide, please. Right, so Hisayo and the family left Lemon Creek and met Kamezo at Moose Jaw. And here we can see that Kamezo wrote a letter to the custodian to request funds from his account so that he could purchase winter clothing for his family. The request was denied, and the stories I know from my Bachin was that it was really, really cold there. And there was so much snow at one point that the snow was piled up to the top of the roof of one of the places that, one of the buildings on site on the Air Force. And it was so high that they could actually climb up to the hill and toboggan down the side. of the roof there. And it was quite shocking to see and emotionally upsetting, to be honest, that the request for warm clothing was denied. So funds from their own bank account. Next slide. And I think the most shocking surprise that I came across in Kameza's case file was the discovery of a different last name. So here in this document and also in others from his file, we can see that he also used the last name Yamamoto. I'm unsure why this is. Yamamoto is a very popular last name, but Okushimo is very, very unusual. And probably if you Google Okushimo, you're only going to find my relatives online. So this is going to be a great source of information for me to continue this research and explore what the last name is and why. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, this is a great photo that I really cherish. And there you can see Hisayo seated and her husband Kamezo standing behind her as they're surrounded by their grandchildren. So it's just such a heartwarming photograph. This is, many years after they've had to resettle more than 3 times and eventually found Toronto as their home. My dad is there standing on the left holding the dog. And it's such a great photo. Not much survived from before the war in our family, but we have a handful of stories and photographs like this one to help us remember. So thank you very much. And we're going to get ready here. We've got Sherri Kajiwara, who's our director curator here at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, and she's also co-chair of the exhibit cluster for the project. So take it away, Sherri.
Thanks, Lisa. Can everybody hear me? I was having trouble with my mic earlier.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, terrific. So as Lisa mentioned earlier, I am the director curator of the Nikkei National Museum, and I just want to echo her land acknowledgement that we are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Kwikwetlem First Nations. And being a partner on Landscapes of Injustice, as Lisa also mentioned, I had early access to my family files, thanks in my case to Caitlin Finley, who was on my museum exhibits cluster team. I was adopted into Canada at the age of 3 into a Nikkei family who were living in Lethbridge, Alberta at the time, but were originally from Mission and North Vancouver. Both the Kajiwaras and Kunimotos were forcibly removed from BC during the war, with my Canadian parents' immediate family sent to the prairies and sugar beet fields. I knew they had been displaced, but the details have only begun to become clear to me within the last decade. I only spoke Japanese until I was 4, and one of my first in my Canadian family to literally take me in his arms when I arrived from Japan was my Kunimoto Ji-chan, a 6-foot-tall, elegant, silver-haired man who smelled like leather and mothballs, and in all my memories was always in a suit. His wife, my Bachan, who had been of poor health all during the internment years and then completely bedridden for her last 17, passed away a month after my arrival. But apparently I blabbered away to her in Kumamoto Ben and made her eyes sparkle, even though I've been told subsequently that she was incoherent by then. I had been babysat by my Hi-Bachan in Japan, so she was actually the most familiar and felt the closest to real family in my new home. Despite my Canadian family's lived trauma, they rarely spoke about it. I had a sheltered and relatively privileged upbringing and was supported in keeping my ties to my family back in Japan. When I received both Kunimoto and Kajiwara case files, I was curious, but didn't fully grasp how emotional it would be to read forms, letters, lists, and documents. In the case of my Kajiwara family, pictured here, the file is only 5 pages long. The first page is shown on the right side of the slide here. For the Kunimotos, because Ji-chan had been a farmer and community leader in Mission, his files, including both the custodian and the bird commission, are over 200 pages. So my Kajiwara Bachan, pictured here, was uprooted to Alberta to live with her daughter who had married and was already in Picture Butte. The other two people in there are my Canadian parents. I think this photo was taken in the 70s. I don't really know much about Kajiwara Bachang until towards the end of her life in Vancouver. But I later learned that she had been a regular at Tonarigumi and always had a sunny smile that belied her past hardships. She had come to Canada to take her deceased sister's place in the Kajiwara family. She was stepmother to 2 almost adult children and then had 4 of her own, one of whom who died young. And she lost her husband when my dad, the youngest, was just a child. Because she didn't own any land when the war broke out, her file is just her RCMP records where she lists my dad. All the other siblings were above the age of being on her record. Shingo Kunimoto, shown here in front of his house he built on his mission farm with his youngest son, Roy, I think this photo is circa 1928 or 9, had arrived from Japan while still in his late teens and was a naturalized Canadian. He married in his 20s and decided farming would provide the most stable conditions to raise a family. I discovered that fact through a written interview my Jichan gave that is in a Japanese directory on Nikkei in Canada in our archives, thanks to Dr. Eiji Okawa, who was then an RA working on the community records and directory cluster that I was co-chair on before the museum exhibits cluster. Dr. Eiji Okawa read out the text for me, which I recorded and played for my mom. And it was like hearing Jichan's own voice, as the author and narrator were likely similar in age, just almost 100 years apart. When Shingo Kunimoto was forcibly removed from their home in 1942, Jichan was 55 years old after having had a family of 7, cultivating a successful berry and hops farm with years of hard labor, employing many seasonal workers, sponsoring many men from extended family in Japan to come to Canada, and had been the head of the Mission Farmers Co-op for many years. Like many Japanese Canadian farmers, his farm was dispossessed by the custodian for veterans' land use. He had a good friend and neighbor, Mr. Barnett, whose wife had taught all of the Japanese children in mission. Mr. Barnett tried to keep Jichan's belongings safe and later tried to help broker fair selling prices for things never to be returned. This is a sample letter that I discovered in his files, and I just transcribed a couple pieces that were specifically poignant to me. The hardest correspondence, though, to read were the handwritten letters from my grandfather, not only because no one handwrites in cursive longhand anymore, but because of the eloquent and painfully humble language. This one, written in 1944 to the custodian's office in the Royal Bank building in Vancouver, where Jichan mentions his ailing wife, was particularly heartbreaking. And you might notice that the letter is care of, and so I believe this was transcribed for him. But the cursive writing is a little bit challenging, so it's nice to be able to spend time with them. It was actually in the Bird Commission files where the dispossession became clear. I was amazed to see the range of his crops and to learn that he was also a landlord and had tenants. The custodian had valued his property at $11,600 in 1943, but he never received any funds from the forced sale of his land. And because the land had been taken, even the rental rights were taken away, which would have earned him $1,000 a year during the 1940s. I never knew of any of this, and I don't think my parents did either. My mother had been sent to Japan as a tween before the war broke out and had been separated from her Kunimoto family until 1948. She returned to find her mother an invalid and her father a broken, but still stoically proud man. Like many other in the Nikkei community, I am only now unpacking the histories of my Japanese Canadian family. Records like these case files are difficult to read. I have yet to read every single page, and I don't know if I ever will, but I am grateful for the snapshots, windows, and the cracks through which I have been able to visit this complicated past, and I invite all of you to investigate your family's records as well.
Thank you so much, Sherri. So next up, we have Kelly Fleck. Kelly Fleck is the editor of Nikkei Voice, a nationally distributed Japanese-Canadian newspaper. Published 10 times a year, the newspaper is an important medium for Japanese-Canadian expression and communication, covering news, community, art, and culture. A graduate of Carleton University's Bachelor of Journalism program, Kelly is interested in exploring stories about identity, culture, and community. A Yonsei, or fourth-generation Japanese Canadian, her goal is to write and share stories that connect and celebrate the Japanese Canadian community. So please join me in welcoming Kelly.
Hi, I hope everyone can hear me okay, but great. Like Lisa said so nicely, my name is Kelly. I'm the managing editor of Nikkei Voice. So over the last year, Nikkei Voice has been working with landscapes of injustice. We've been sharing the stories like the ones that you've heard today about Japanese Canadians' discoveries in their family case files. So when Michael asked me if I would be interested in seeing my family case files, of course I was interested. So all of the stories I've heard about my family history come from my botchan, my favorite person, who's always been very open about sharing her stories and answering my questions, which I realize I'm quite fortunate for. But she was only 12 when she was interned. So accessing these files have been a way to, authenticate and understand my Bachan's memories about her family, as well as a way to dig into her parents' experience. So the files that Mike pulled for me pertain to the people you see on the screen right here. So my great-great-grandfather Bunichi and his daughter Hana and her husband Matsunosuke, as well as their 5 eldest children. So there were so many files, when I was going through it, but I'd like to focus on one part of my great-grandmother Hana's story today. So I wanted to learn about more about the store that Hana and Matsunosuke ran in Vancouver. The store is the center of a lot of my botchan stories about her childhood. So while my botchan still remembers the address of the store, she couldn't remember the store name. So when I opened Hana's files, the first thing that came up was her trying to sell the store, and so to see the store's name right there in front of me was like a light going on. So in the case files, I found the store name called Star Confectionery. It was right where my botchan remembered it, at 2700 Commercial Drive in Vancouver. It was a small grocery store, and connected to the back was the family home, which was a 4-room frame house that they rented for $15 a month. So my botchan always says that since Hana was an only child and quite lonely growing up, she wanted a lot of children, and so she ended up having 9. You can see their names listed on this form right here. But I always imagine, the home brimming with life with the 9 Hamade children coming and going. So it was in front of that store where my botchan learned to ride her brother's bike. When her brothers were busy, her father would send her off on the bike with groceries in the basket to deliver to customers. And the store is where my botchan learned to bake. She's 91 now, but she used to be a really great baker and cook. And she used to take a mixing bowl down to the dry storage and take the flour and sugar she needed to make treats for her siblings after a long day of school and work. So in Hannah's case files, they offered a glimpse into what must have been the darkest time for the store. So the documents from the office of the custodian detail her experience selling the business and its contents before the family was interned in Lemon Creek. So the files say that at this point, her husband was interned at a road camp in Tetejan, I'm going to pronounce that horribly, and her 2 eldest sons were also sent to road camps. Everyone was in separate road camps. Isa was in Jasper, Yoshio was in Salsqua, and Hannah was left alone to sell the business with her 7 other children, the youngest being 5 months old at the time. So the files detail an inspection that was made by H.D. Campbell of the store and its stock before it could be sold. In the files, I found that Hannah had valued her grocery stock at $700, the store fixtures at $300. My botchan always tells me the story. When she was 12 years old, she remembers watching Hannah go through each item in the store with a man with a clipboard. So I'm not sure if this was Campbell or the person who ended up buying the business, but every price that Hannah suggested or proposed, he would counter with a lower price and check off on the clipboard. In Campbell's report, he valued the grocery stock at $300 to $400 and then wrote of the store fixtures, I'll read you the quote. The store's fixtures are considerably run down and are generally a shabby setup, are probably not worth more than half the amount valued at, and might bring, if realization was necessary, an amount of slightly over $100. So with not much time to negotiate or leverage a better offer, Hana ended up selling the business, the stock, and the fixtures for $175. So that's less than 1/5 the price she had originally hoped for before the family was evacuated 3 days later to Lemon Creek. So after finding a buyer, in a letter to H.D. Campbell, she writes, I have considerably reduced my stock, and as I apparently cannot get very much for my fixtures, I am satisfied to accept this offer. So one of the questions Michael asked us to consider as we put this presentation together is how our families reacted to what we found. So I told my family what I had learned over dinner one night, and we were thrilled that my botchin could remember things from 75 years later. But there was also a collective sadness as we reflected on Hannah's experiences. So as for the rest of my family, I invited some of them here today, and I can see them in the chat. But there were 9 Hamadeh children, so I have a lot of cousins, and I haven't really shared what I found with them yet. And I think it's because, these files are sad, they're hard to look at, and they took me a really long time to go through. And I found I had to stop because I kept getting, angry and upset. It's hard to look at these files and see your family assigned to a case number and the contents of their lives being assigned a value, and that value being lower than what those items were worth or what they meant to them. So I compare, the words that Campbell uses in his inspection of the family store, words like rundown and shabby, with how that store provided for a family of 11 and was the place of my botchin's childhood memories. So I'm a Yonsei fourth generation Japanese Canadian, and sometimes these histories can feel kind of far away. The stories my botchin tells me are often fragmented, they're snippets or pieces, and again, she was only 12 at the time. So these files help ground these memories in real dates and places. So now that the Landscapes of Injustice has launched this digital database, I really encourage other Yonseis to type in their family name and see what comes up, to find their family's case files and reclaim their family's stories. These stories are a part of us, and these histories are ones that we've inherited. And in the context of today, the anti-Asian racism and rhetoric, it's always existed. These files are proof of it, but it emphasizes that these histories are important to remember. So I thank Landscapes of Injustice for the work that was put into this project, and for inviting me to be in the space and to share my story. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thanks.
And our last speaker, storyteller today is Stephanie Kawamoto. Is a Yonsei, originally from Hamilton, but now living in Ottawa. She is an elementary school French teacher and also teaches coding and grade 6 social studies unit on Japanese Canadians during and after the Second World War. Outside of work, she is a competitive pickleball player and an amateur musician. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. As Lisa just said, I'm Stephanie. I'm a teacher and a Yonsei. And I'm fortunate enough that I get to teach about the Japanese Canadians and share their story with students at my school. So I am Yonsei on all sides of the family. On my mom's side, I'm a Kagetsu and a Hyodo. And on my dad's side, I'm a Kawamoto and a Koyanegi. Before getting the case files, I knew quite a bit about my mom's side of the family. My great-grandfather on my mom's maternal side was Eikichi Kagetsu, and my great-aunt on my mom's paternal side was Hidehiro Shimizu. So their stories are fairly documented, and we have a lot of historians on that side of the family. And when I went on the internment bus tour almost 2 years ago now, we learned that the Kagetsu family was in a self-supporting site, which is slightly different than an internment camp. So some of their heirlooms that we have now could have come with them when they were sent to an internment site, rather than what we had assumed, which was they would have to give their belongings to neighbors or friends who would hide them and keep them safe and then send them later in Ontario. So it's possible that the piano that we grew up with is actually something that went with them to this site instead of being left behind. I also used to interview my great uncle, Yoshio Hyodo, when I was in high school. And he would come in and speak to the grade 10 students so that they could learn about the Japanese Canadians and their experiences during the war. So I learned about some of my family history that way. I learned that way that my grandfather and great uncle joined the Navy at the end of the war because the government thought that they could be interpreters, not realizing that they didn't speak Japanese. So they had to go to language training, and by the time they finished that, the war was over and they didn't actually go overseas. On my dad's side of the family, I didn't really know very much about our family history. I knew my grandma's family was from Sea Island, where the airport is now, and then they were relocated to Taber, Alberta on a sugar beet farm, but I didn't know anything about my grandfather's family. When I got the documents, it was really, really interesting to finally have some answers and to read about everyone. Although there were still so many unanswered questions. And as others have said, some files were extensive, others were very short. The files on the Kagetsu side of the family were overwhelming. There was so much there because there was so much loss. And I still haven't finished going through those. Hopefully I will at some point. I had already known my grandparents and great-grandparents' Japanese names, but I didn't know any of the great aunts and great uncles' Japanese names because we always called them by either their shortened names or their English names. So it was really cool to see them all written out, as you can see on the slide. It took a bit of figuring out who was who, just contextually, but it was very interesting to see. One of the things I was really grateful to find out about was where the Kawamoto side of my family was during the war. My grandfather has dementia, but in one moment of lucidity, he had said that he went to Yellowhead Road Camp. He actually went to Greenwood. And once I got the files, I was able to go back to the documents we had received during the internment bus tour and see where his family's house was in Greenwood during the war. So that was really cool to see that. Sad as well, but just being able to look on a map and say, oh, that's where he lived. It was very interesting. Another thing I noticed when I got the files was how much the government took from the Japanese Canadian families, on top of the fact that they took their belongings and sold them. So they took off auctioneers' fees, advertising fees, moving fees, storage fees, just all sorts of extra amounts. So the amounts that the Japanese Canadians actually received after all the fees and all of the valuations that weren't what they believed they were worth, there was a huge disparity. And that's something I talk about with my students when I teach about the internment era. We look at these documents, both from my family and from other documents through Landscapes of Injustice. And we look at loss, not just material loss, but then loss through government and loss of memories and sentimental belongings. When I was looking at the files and finally got to see where everyone went, I made some color-coded maps. And these are another teaching tool that I use when I teach about the internment. So it's very hard to see, they're kind of small, but they have numbers based on where people started out and where people ended up after the war. And some of them are very simple, like the Koyanegis started in the Vancouver area and then moved to Chin, Alberta, and then Taber, whereas other families like the Hyodos moved all over the place. So them being able to reunite after the war would have been more difficult. And during the Powell Street simulation, one of the buildings that are in the activity that Landscapes of Injustice created was actually a building owned by my great-grandparents on the Kawamoto side, which I didn't know until I saw the files. So then I was talking to Greg Miyanaga, who's in charge of the elementary teaching resources cluster, and he updated, or he made sure that it was updated on the activity. So this year when I was teaching the activity, I actually got to give a student my great-grandparents' store to create, and that was very meaningful for me and very sentimental. I also found out that my great-grandfather on the Kawamoto side went to the prisoner of war camp in Angler, Ontario, which I had no idea that any of my great-grandparents or family members were in a POW camp. So I'm still looking into that. His files don't have a lot of information for why he was sent there or what happened, but I'm still trying to do research to find out more. On the Kyoto side, I found that while many Japanese Canadians in their letters of protest to the government about how their property was taken and sold, many of them were subdued and politely disgruntled. But Hiri Kyoto Shimizu was quite demanding and straightforward, and her efforts did pay off. The government allowed some of the Kyoto's things to be shipped to them or to friends and relatives outside the protected area instead of selling them. So it was very surprising, but at the same time not, because she was a force to be reckoned with. And also on the Kyoto side, I found out that my grandfather was allowed to stay on the coast to finish high school in Vancouver before relocating to Hamilton, which I hadn't known either. Overall, I found the experience of seeing the files and reading about my family very informative. First and foremost, to understand my own family history, but also using all these files as teaching tools for my students. I use the documents to make a choose your own adventure activity on Google Forms based on my grandparents and great-grandparents' lives. So I changed the last names, but kept the first names. And I use this as kind of a wrap up of when I'm teaching, and also for the public, so that people can learn more about what it was like during World War II for the Japanese Canadians. And there's a link on the screen if you'd like to check out the activity. And I don't know, I can share it in the chat after as well. All in all, I'm extremely grateful that Landscapes of Injustice gave me the opportunity to see my family's files and to participate in this and in the field school, and that the Nikkei National Museum had the bus tour as well. It's been very rewarding for me.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hide Kyoto is one of my personal heroes, so I am so thrilled to see that letter. You know, be demanding, have a voice, take up space. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to Kelly and Sherri as well for sharing their family stories. It's so interesting to see all these threads sort of interleaving all of our stories into this greater community narrative, but also understanding how different each individual narrative was, and that this whole experience of the forced uprooting and dispossession is not the same for everyone. And you will see that in your own case files when you start to explore that. And for researchers who are studying and exploring these records that are now in the database, do keep that in mind as well. It's really hard to generalize any of this history. These records are just so rich. And very, very hard to go through. And you can get that sense from all of us speaking today. You can feel the emotions that we're expressing as we're sharing these stories that are hard. And probably for the first little while, I couldn't actually talk about without getting very emotional or angry. And I'm grateful to be able to share that with you today. Great, so I'm just going to invite everyone here to keep in mind, save the date. So on the last Wednesday of every month from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time, we will have drop-in community sessions. So if you're going through the database and you're exploring and you want to ask some questions, if maybe the search function's not working for you, or if you want to have a conversation to gather some more contextualized history around the events that are taking place that you see in the case file, drop in, share this link with your family and friends, also encourage them to drop in. And for researchers and students, you're more than welcome to also come in, be active in participating, ask questions, and listen as well to the family story. So save the date. The last Wednesday of each month from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time. Everyone is welcome. You can also stay in touch with the project by subscribing to the newsletter, and the link is at the bottom there, landscapesofinjustice.com/subscribe-newsletter. And that's a great way to stay in touch with all of us here on the research project and to get updates from all of the partner institutions as well. So there's lots of messages here in the chat, and I'm just going to try and see if I can scroll through and find some of the questions. So first one I see is it possible to correct information in the abstracts? That's a great question. So definitely, and maybe we can pull up the database again so people can see. But on the database, we do have an About Us tab, and we'll just wait a moment here while that gets pulled up. And it includes our contact information. So you can either drop into one of our sessions every last Wednesday of every month, or you can get in touch with us through the contact information here on the website. Of course, anything that's within the descriptive text that the project has physically typed up into the database, we can change and adjust, and you may see that for instances of spelling mistakes, dates, anything like that. So we did our best to pull the information from the records that we are seeing. But of course, we understand that there are going to be errors in the original government records themselves. So do contact us. There's the information there on the screen. And you can work with us to identify those issues. Do keep in mind, though, any of the information that shows up in the attachments, so the downloadable PDFs that you will see, those records cannot be changed. Those are copies of the original records and will stay as they are. But of course, any of the language we can change as well. You'll also see on the database, you'll see it popping up there under the contact title. It'll say terminology, and this is a really great resource to review and to take a look. So it'll give you a notice to say, you know, there are terminology being used within the records that you are going to be downloading and reading, and perhaps it is different from the terminology that we would actually prefer folks to be using today. So it addresses euphemisms such as evacuation or oh, there we go. Yes, so different inappropriate terms, evacuation, the protected zone, being sent back to Japan, you know, words like that that don't accurately reflect the correct narrative of the forced and uprooting and dispossession and how unjust it was. So these are appropriate terms. Of course, it's not a comprehensive overview, but do take a look. And certainly for students and educators, please review this as well. Right, so just scrolling down and looking for any more questions.
There's a question for Stephanie, actually.
Oh, perfect. Do you want to read that one there?
Someone's just wondering, Stephanie, whether you teach Japanese Canadian experience during the First World War in your class.
Oh, I responded to that in a private message, but
okay.
I'll address it here. So the grade 6 social studies curriculum in Ontario only specifies the World War II experience of Japanese Canadians, and it's not my homeroom class. It's actually a partnership with the grade 6 and 5-6 teachers at my school. So I'm going in there for 2 weeks at a time to teach, but I don't want to take too much time out of the limited time that they have to cover their curriculum. So I only teach about the World War II experiences.
Great, thank you, Stephanie.
There's a question, Lisa, from Candy in the chat. And I wonder if Candy Tanaka wants to come on and ask the question, just because there's aspects of it I'm not totally sure. It asks whether the archive is as complete as possible.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Yeah, I'm just wondering, I found a huge custodian case file on my grandfather's side. And I'm just wondering if there might be more documents that might be added to that at some point. I'm just wondering how complete, like, I know you guys have done tons of work, which I'm super grateful for, but I'm just wondering, like, are there random boxes still to go through? And, you know, is it possible that there might be more added later on? I did notice that there's no photos, probably because, you know, it's possible that my family has kept a lot of those photos. So I'm just kind of wondering what stage, you know, the custodian case files are in. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. That's a great question. And do keep in mind when going through the database that we have been very lucky to partner with all of these institutions that actually hold the original records. So I always encourage you, if you see something within, you know, Library and Archives Canada in the National Archives repository there, it will be a stepping stone into exploring more. Same with the Nikkei National Museum. We just physically weren't able to add everything that we have in our holdings to this incredible database. So in terms of the case files themselves, the case files are complete. I think we've been made aware that there might be a couple missing from one of the microfilm rolls that wasn't fully digitized or the files not transferred, but we will be working on that. As for the case files, though, from, you know, page 1 to the last page, that will be all that there is. A great way to think about doing more research is to also think about, you know, as you're putting together the pieces and you recognize where some of your family members went, there might be more information in those provincial archives. So we see a lot in the BC archives as well. We might see some in the archives in Saskatchewan, or it depends on if you think of where the power was at that time. So in the instances of my great grandfather, knowing he was incarcerated in the Angler prisoner of war camp, there are going to be records within the RCMP records. Unfortunately, those are not fully included on our database. So that would be where I would say go back to Library and Archives Canada and work with the archivist there to do more research. And I think this sort of ties into another question as well, where it was asking how complete these records are. During the research phase, we were focusing, because, you know, it's such a big history. It seems like such a small amount of time, but when you start looking at the entire Japanese Canadian experience within Canada, you know, over 100 years ago, that's a lot of information. And so we were specifically looking at the forced dispossession, and a lot of the records focus on the loss. So you're not always going to see a lot of records about loss of education, loss of having a place, you know, the emotional loss of losing your home. So that's where I would encourage you to listen to the oral histories that the project has recorded, and you can get some more information about different types of loss that you don't see within the government records. Okay, let's see, are there more questions here? I see lots of thanks, and thank you so much for those kind words. Jordan, do you see any other messages or questions?
I haven't seen other questions. There's lots of wonderful, wonderful thanks and comments, Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Mike, I see myself on the screen. Thank you. Great. So yes, I think within, you know, the monthly sessions, that's going to be a really great place to come together and to talk about what you're exploring and what you're seeing. There's lots of great resources on the Landscapes of Injustice website, the teacher resources, the traveling exhibit, of course. So there's quite a bit that the project has put together. But one of my favorites that I'm you know, getting through right now on my own copy is the new publication, Landscapes of Injustice, a new perspective on the internment and dispossession of Japanese Canadians. And as you can see, it's not a small book, it's quite hefty. And there's some amazing contributions from the academics who have worked on this research collective with us. And there's just an incredible amount of information to give you some contextualized history on you know, what was going on in the people who had the power. What does the research show that they were thinking and doing and acting on? And so it's a great resource. Of course, I would always pair this with Anne Gomer Sunahara's publication, The Politics of Racism, which has been an integral piece of putting together the history in our community. And that is available as a free ebook online, and you can get that on JapaneseCanadianHistory.ca. And this book, Landscapes of Injustice, you can pick up from the Nikkei National Museum shop, or you can order it online. We do have an online shop there. Okay, so let's see, any more questions? So many wonderful comments, and it's so great to see that people that I know and hear. And of course, we had another question at our last session on Sunday as to whether or not it's possible to donate and add more materials to the database. The project is wrapping up. We have a few things that we want to add in from the other repositories that are listed there. But in terms of adding new collections, that's just not something that's directly feasible within this time frame. Hopefully we'll be able to get some additional SHRC funding in the future that we can continue this incredible initiative. But in the meantime, we do have us here at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center. You can talk to us about items that you're finding, you know, in your closets, in your basements, attics, who knows where it is. If you have any questions at all, do reach out to me, Lisa Uyeda at the Nikkei National Museum, and we can talk more about what you're finding, how best to take care of it, and if maybe donating it to an archives is the right time for you. So here at the Nikkei National Museum, we take in donations, and the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto also has an archives, and the staff are on this call right now, so hello. And so you're welcome to get in touch with either of us. It's great to have that partnership because we're on, you know, sort of opposite ends of the country and can support the community in the best way that we can together. And of course, you can explore our database, nikkeimuseum.org, for that one too. Great, and thank you, Jordan, for sharing the link to Anne's publication, JapaneseCanadianHistory.ca. Anne worked with us last year on creating a new photo essay. So as we were getting ready to launch it in an electronic format, Anne worked with us to curate a selection of photographs, highlighting a lot of untold stories, specifically those of the women within our community and how they managed to survive this horrible time period. Thank you so much. I see lots of thanks, and thank you so much for that. Wonderful. So I think if there aren't any other questions coming in, then we can wrap up today's session. Just a few minutes overtime here. You're welcome to hang out and say hello and to chat. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Again, we want to just give thanks, and we're just so proud of how we've been able to come together and put this whole Landscapes of Injustice project together from all the different initiatives, the traveling exhibit, which will be leaving here at the Nikkei National Museum soon and going to the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center next, and then we'll continue to travel after that. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Keep in touch, subscribe to our e-news, check out our website resources, start doing some research, get in touch and drop into our Wednesday sessions. Thank you so much, everyone. So great to see all my friends. I see Richard and Timothy waving. That's great.